Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Roger Johnson in Seattle, Washington. Roger is the Director of Individual Giving at the Seattle International Film Festival, where he's responsible for membership, events, and major gifts. Recognized as one of the top festivals in North America, the Seattle International Film Festival is the largest, most highly attended film festival in the United States. Roger, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks. It's good to be talking with you again.
Yes, we haven't talked in quite a long time. I met you originally here in Memphis, and I'm trying to think of when that even was.
I wonder if it was at a Ballet Memphis event or if it was through an introduction. No, it was probably at an event that Eric held at the space where they used to have Emerge Memphis. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. We're just before we got started, you mentioned that festival season is upon you. When is your festival each year?
Yes. The Seattle International Film Festival runs from May 14th to June 7th this year. It's a 25-day festival. In addition to being the most attended, it's also the longest. Most film festivals are, over a weekend or a week or maybe 10 days. But we got started at 25 days, and it's become a tradition. And so people will see over 100 films during that time. In some cases, it's become a real destination for people in the film industry. So we had our big preview last night, and so now we're fully into the season.
Wow. Well, thank you for taking the time with me. I'm sure your life must be very busy right now.
It has definitely picked up very recently, but thankfully today I have time to calm down a bit before things ramp up again next week. So
yeah,
it was a great time.
That's great. Well, as I mentioned before we started, you are the Director of Individual Giving. And what I would really like to do today is to kind of share with our listeners what that means and kind of a little more information for people who might be interested in pursuing a career in giving. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to be the Director of International Giving? Kind of what do you do?
Well, in the context of the film festival, I have three areas that I am responsible for, and that is membership, which is a large portion of our annual revenue. We have nearly 7,000 members at various levels. And then we have major gifts, which is more of my background. My last position in Seattle before I left for a few years was as a major gift officer. And so I would like to spend as much of my time as possible on building on our current donor pool, and I'm also very deliberately looking through prospects, mostly from our member list, so it all ties together. And then special events, as you can imagine, an organization like the Film Festival, we like to throw parties and galas and auctions and have dinners with filmmakers from around the world when they come in for festival, and it's a great way to engage with our audience and to focus on certain prospects we're trying to interest in investing in SIF. So all of these areas tie together very nicely, but the most important thing is to always stay focused. With such a large organization that has such history here. Everyone says they love the festival, but I'm trying to find people who will translate that into supporting it at high levels. Mm-hmm. And so I have to figure out who I need to speak with and what is the venue where I'm going to be able to connect with people.
Wow, that sounds like it has a lot to do with building relationships. Is that true?
I think that is absolutely the key thing, and that's the thread that has run through my career, not just in nonprofit. I have occasionally ventured into other, I've worked for large corporations. I've also, worked as a consultant, and that's always been the clear thing to me. And I think that's how I measure my success, on the quality of relationships I build. And reflecting on that, I think I mentioned earlier, I've been back in Seattle for 1 year. I lived here for 8 years, and a lot of the, people that I worked with and got to know just by virtue of living in Seattle, I'm now in a position where I can, move those relationships to help SIF, so it's always vital, of course, when you're looking for a job, and also if you're in a field like I am with individual giving, that is so crucial. It saves you time. It enables you to get into the right situations where you're going to have conversations with the prospects that you've identified.
That's so interesting. So how long have you worked in development? How many years roughly?
Wow, yes. My first job in development was in 2003 in Seattle, and I've mostly been in the field ever since. I have done a few other projects during that time, but pretty much since 2002.
Okay, and how did you get started? I mean, what was sort of the first step?
Let's see, I can go a little bit further back. I wasn't really conscious of development as a field that I would be actually interested in pursuing a career, but I did have a family connection when I was in college with someone who was very successful fundraising director in Boston for an organization, and it was actually through talking with him, just asking him, what do you do? And as I was curious about all these events that he was coordinating, and sometimes be at his office and he'd be speaking with a donor or donor prospect, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting field to be in. And this man had a couple of different careers before he transitioned into fundraising, and so it was always in the back of my mind. And the other impetus was, I worked for a couple of years after college in the investment banking field, and I'll never forget this. I was having lunch downtown Minneapolis with the head of HR for a large bank in Minneapolis, and we were talking about career where I was at, and he had gotten a sense for how I operate and the relationships I build, and connections I've made in the alumni community. And he says to me at one point, "You know what? You would be great in development."
Wow.
That's not the reason that I changed my career path, but I thought that was interesting. I was trying to get him to help me advance my career in this, in this completely different field, and he's trying to convince me that maybe I should look at other things. And I had already had a little bit of experience in development, and then when I moved to Seattle, it was a good time for me to transition into something new. And my first job was with the University of Washington, with their prospect research team. And the reason that I took that position was through a connection. And I was trying to break into the field. I was doing a lot of informational interviews. I was researching online. How do you do this? And so I got my feet wet for about 6 months there, and then I leveraged that position into being development director for a very small organization, and that was actually through a career coach who advised me that being with a small organization where you're able to do everything, where the stakes are a little bit lower, where you can make mistakes, will really get you to see if you can be successful and if this is something you want to continue. And about 6 weeks into that job, we suddenly learned we needed to do a $2.5 million capital campaign.
Wow.
And I had never written a grant. I had never asked for a major gift. I had never, really worked with a board to do fundraising. And, the executive director explains this to me, and she says, "Do you think you can do this?" And I'm like, "Sure." And, and I really didn't know that I could, but we did it. And, we were able to raise the funds to replace one of the sites. This was a family service and Head Start program in Seattle, and so having a success like that certainly convinced me that I was in the right field.
Yeah, that's great. Even your story with the guy or the person who pointed out to you should be in development. I mean, gosh, how lucky if we could all just have someone just tell us.
I know, it's not always that easy that someone pulls something out of a drawer and says, "Here you go. This is your mission."
Right. Well, I really like it that you mentioned you've done a lot of informational interviews. That's something I really encourage my clients to do, because I think it's rare that you just kind of wake up and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to go into development," or "I think I'll go into engineering." But if you talk to other people and you ask them about what they do, you can kind of learn from them and things start to make sense to you or they don't.
Yes. I completely connect with that statement. And it's been a big part of my again back then transition into the field, but then just ongoing professional development. And in fact, there's a recent example where I've on the other side now, and I've been kind of mentoring a new development director at a small organization in Seattle who, is completely new to the field, transitioned from publishing. And so that's been rewarding to be able to help out, in that respect. I guess that means that I've become somewhat of a veteran in the field.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, also from your example, I really like how they ask you, "Can you do this?" And you said, "Sure." Right? Even though you were unsure. And that's a tactic that I have always taken is, I believe in myself. I know I can figure it out. But I don't know if you've seen in the news, there was a study recently that compared women to men in terms of the application process. And they said that in order, and I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but they said in order for a woman to feel confident applying for a position, she must feel like she meets like 95% of the requirements on the job description. But for a man, it's somewhere between like 50 and 60%.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it is interesting. And so I've heard that statistic come up quite a bit lately in terms of encouraging people to apply. And, the company can always say no to you, but why say no to them if you think you can probably do it?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it. Yes.
Yeah, it opens a lot of doors. You don't need to close the door on yourself. Someone else can do that if they, if they feel like it's not a fit.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like some, the last year when I moved back to Seattle, I've done a lot of interviews and searching for jobs, and you see these long lists of things that you have to remember that they're just throwing the kitchen sink at you. Yes, it'd be lovely to have someone who's single one of these boxes, but it's like we all have different strengths and focus and experience, and and as long as we understand the larger goal and how we'll fit within that organization, I think that you can have that confidence. Is I'm not trying to fit myself exactly how this is laid out, but I know I can do it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, in terms of development, I mean, as you mentioned, you've become a veteran. You've been very successful in the field. What do you think are your strengths that have allowed you to be so successful? Is it mainly relationship building, or do you think there's other pieces to it as well?
I would say that is by far the most crucial thing. Is maintaining those quality relationships across the field. And kind of going back to what we were talking about a little bit ago, I've also had the philosophy that, especially in these smaller towns like Seattle and Memphis and other places I've been, is like everyone is only a few degrees separated, and you never know, where one relationship or meeting is going to lead you to, because we're all so interconnected now, and so sometimes I'll take random coffee appointments or lunches, and there's no like, oh, well, I know exactly what I'm going to get out of this conversation. But then, maybe, a week later, you're trying to reach someone else, and it's like, oh, well, that person that I, just, met at random last week, can help me get into the door somewhere. And also in nearly every job that I've gotten has been through a connection. Maybe I've applied without having an in, but I usually have had a connection on the board or staff that has been very critical to convincing the committee that I'm the right candidate. But apart from relationship building, is also and it of course took several years to figure this out. Is when I walk into a job like I'm in currently, there's so many different directions you can go. There's so many different leads, and just having that focus and priority, and using some analytical skills. I think development is a real combination between art and science. Of course, we need good data and we need good research on who we're focusing on, but a lot of it is also just having that experience and having those quality relationships that you're able to, figure out. These are the top 25 people that I need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah.
I think you give really smart advice there that applies to a lot of industries in terms of how you find jobs as well. The world is a really small place, and we're so well connected on things like LinkedIn. I was actually working with a client last night who is in another state, and she had an interest in a particular company in that state that's headquartered there. And I looked on my LinkedIn, and I think I had about 25 second-degree connections and 700 third-degree connections.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so we were able to really quickly go through and say, email this person and email this person.
Oh, right.
It's always better if you can find an in within the company, and I think that's just such a good point. But in today's environment, a lot of times HR departments encourage you to just apply online. We'll let you know. And many times when you do that, a real person never lays eyes on your resume. And so you miss out on so many opportunities if you don't take advantage of the relationship side of the whole process.
Oh, yes. Completely. That's definitely been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mentioned to you before we got started that many of the clients that I work with, and sometimes people who write into me, they ask me, should I go back to school? Because they're interested in a new field and they don't have an education. Maybe their undergraduate degree is in a different area, and they really believe that if they only went back to school, they could switch industries, but that they have to go back to school. So I'm curious, what did you study in school?
Well,
this is a loaded question, obviously.
No. Yes, I did not study individual giving. That's for sure. I didn't, at least directly.
Mm-hmm.
No, I went to a liberal arts college, and I had two majors of cultural geography and classical studies.
Mm-hmm.
I studied ancient Greek. I studied archaeology and ancient history, and then on cultural geography side, we were looking at why place matters on all these different contexts. And so, yeah, absolutely. I I don't have any certificate or certification in fundraising. Not that I don't think that there are valuable things to be gained from those. But it was obviously also another piece of advice that I received from someone who built his career the same way I did and who had switched from another field. And when I was contemplating development as a field, I asked him, "Is there any course or book that you can read, to learn about this?" And he said, "Well, if you think you're going to learn it from a book, then you're in the wrong field." Not that there isn't structure and things that you can gain from that, but it is true that it's almost all about how you communicate value and how you build relationships. And I would say there's about 20% that is if you're savvy with analyzing data and keeping good records. I mean, that's absolutely part of it. But so much can be overcome when you have the key relationships that how to build and focus on the right people and making them feel valued and helping them see how they're realizing their own goals and visions through the organization that you're working from. And so, I would say that, I think it is a field where you just have to dive in and try it and make mistakes and, build from there. And, I value my colleagues and, I've, done some professional development, conferences and seminars, and then, a lot of informal conversations with people in the field, but I didn't study it formally at all.
No, it makes sense. And I like what the advice the person gave you, that if you need to study it formally, it's the wrong thing. That's the same advice I give to people about digital marketing.
Okay.
As you know, my previous life was as a digital marketer, and when I started, there was no education for it. You had to teach yourself. And it was a great experience because in the digital marketing world, everything is changing every day. And if you are not entrepreneurial, if you cannot teach yourself, if you are not someone that will just go out and try new things, it's not the right field for you. So occasionally I'll get a client that'll come in and say, "I want to be a digital marketer. What class can I take to teach me about that?" And I'm like, I think you need to just sign up for AdWords or whatever and just start doing it. You don't have to get permission within this space, and if you need to be led, it's not the right place for you.
Oh yeah. That's an interesting parallel to a different field.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are just certain fields where you have to be entrepreneurial. I would guess that in your field, I'm only guessing, because obviously I haven't been to work with you, but I would guess there's not a ton of structure. You may have to create your own structure and be kind of creative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. And that's what keeps me in the field, is because, you're, constantly thinking through how you can either get in the right room where you're going to meet the right person, or you're looking at existing relationships, or even, I actually have some really great examples from my time in Memphis, but where, there are people that could, maybe take a year or two, but you can, deepen their engagement with the organization. And then when you ask them for a huge gift, it just flows very nicely. And it's like, and I guess, and part of that is, now that I've been doing this several times in different cities for different types of organizations, I used to think, I just got, lucky with that organization or with that donor and got in that gift. And when people would ask me, how did you make that happen? Like, it's just, they would have given, no matter who asked them. And it's like, but then, when these things keep happening and that I can see the steps that I took, even if I didn't know exactly. I didn't have like a 9-step plan charted out. But when I look back, like, oh, well, that person, agreed to give this, really generous, wonderful gift, and it's like, oh, well, it was because of this touch point that I involved them deeper in the relation in the organization through these strategies, and then, oh, okay, yes, so that's how that happened. It wasn't inevitable, and so you can start to develop more confidence that, oh, I can step into this new role, and I may not know everyone. It may have a different culture in the organization. It may be a different type of cause, but I can use these same principles, and it's going to work.
Right, I like that. I'm sure that asking people for large gifts has got to be a very sensitive process.
Yes, we could do a whole other podcast on that. There are always interesting stories to that, but it's again, that is really more on the I guess the creative, artistic side of development, is having the feel for when it's going in the right direction, where you're able to have that conversation. I've done some consulting with organizations, and I'll get frustrated when I'm bringing in some high value prospects, or I'm talking about donor relationship plans, and I know that it's going to take 18 months to get to gift, and one organization I worked with, I brought the founder to some meetings, and they went well, and he wanted to ask them for a big gift the next week, and I was like, no, that is not going to work. That's not how it ever works. He says, oh, but this guy likes me and he likes my organization. Like, yes, but if you have to gain a sense for that, and I can't write a formula or give real specific, but you do have to you have to learn that, and you have to make some mistakes by asking someone way too early or not at the right time, and then you realize, oh well, we got $1,000 from them, but maybe we could have gotten $10,000.
Right. Well, if you were to talk to a young person who was possibly interested in getting into giving at a nonprofit, how would you advise them, and what would you kind of look for to be that person that says, you should do development?
Right. That's an interesting question. And I mean, I have hired people for entry-level development jobs in the past, and I have a team of 4 people that I'm working with now. And actually, when you asked me that question, I was thinking of someone that I recently hired for a position dealing with high-level pass holders for the film festival. Mm-hmm. And I looked through, I don't know how many resumes, but his was the only one I was interested in. I liked the way he communicated, and he had transferable skills from another field. And then when I met with him, I knew within 5 minutes he was the ideal person for this job. And
wow,
we've gone from there. And I think it's going to be quite fabulous. But I've had in the past, I have had some difficult situations where I've either had an entry-level development person, or I've hired someone, and if they're constantly looking for direction or the right answer, or want to know exactly what the process is to do something, I just don't think it's the right field. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities to gain a little experience through like colleges do, what they often utilize student callers to ask their alumni base for gifts, or things like that, or what was valuable to me was working in this prospect research office at the University of Washington. I knew that that's not what I wanted to do for my career, but it was a great way to see what development was all about from a different perspective, and it was just an opportunity that appeared for me, and I took it. So I would just say you definitely got to keep an open mind. Find an organization that is willing to take a chance on you and dive right in.
Absolutely. Well, it's very exciting with the new person that you brought in.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't always work that way. That's I think the only time where I just had this intuition. Yes, and I'm very confident that was the right hire.
Right. Well, I think so often that's kind of how it goes in interviews. The hiring manager has some intuition about the person, and so often I speak with job seekers who say, but I know that I was the smartest, or I know that I had the best education. And, it's like sometimes you have to step back and look at the other pieces and say, well, how was your conversation? And, did you dress appropriately? And, those little details that cause someone to feel a certain way about you, because it's often not really about, do you have the exact right skill set? It's sometimes, are you the best fit for the team?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then I was just going to tag on that in development, in my work, what is so important is follow up. When you make a new contact, if you want to, build on that relationship, you follow up right away. Mm-hmm. And so I interviewed 3 people, and only one of them followed up with me the next morning and indicated that he had a good feeling about working with me and the job, and that he really wanted it. And the other 2 people I interviewed, they never followed up. So I was like, well, that tells me something very big right there.
I think that's such a good point. I get the question probably at least once a week. Do I really have to send a thank you email, or do I really have to send a thank you note? Is that really necessary? And the answer is yes. Absolutely. It may make the difference between you being selected and someone else.
I think that is so true. And I don't know how much more time we have, but I was actually got into a little discussion with one of a board member for a different organization recently about whether doing anything via mail or handwritten notes is valuable. And I think in this age it's more and more and more. I think every time I think to write something specific and thanking someone, I try to do a handwritten note. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. I think a handwritten note is very important. I think it makes you stand out. And I actually recently had a podcast interview with Lizzie and Daniel Post from the Emily Post Institute in Vermont. And I asked them the same question about handwritten notes, and they said, they love them. And they have found that many people actually keep those handwritten notes. So when you do send those to someone's work, they may keep them in their drawer, for example, and remember that you wrote that for quite some time.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting, and I think the value of those is going up
as people are not writing them.
As people are not writing them, yeah.
Right. No, I think handwritten notes are so important, and it's funny. I usually write thank you emails after the podcast, is over, and with the one with the Emily Post Institute, I absolutely went home and did a handwritten note.
Excellent.
Right. I wasn't going to make a mistake there. But anyway, as we mentioned earlier, we met originally when you lived in Memphis, and you actually worked in giving for Ballet Memphis. I know you've also worked with Nespresso as well as United Way and a few other organizations.
Yes.
On the surface, these organizations seem really different. But I bet there's a common theme that has allowed you to move through the different organizations and to be successful in different environments. What is that theme?
Yes, good question. I was just reflecting on my time in the Bluff City when you were mentioning that, and when I moved there, everything was new. I had literally never been to the city. I'd never been in the state of Tennessee. I had no experience in the South, and I knew nothing about ballet. And I really didn't. And again, it was actually through a connection that I had in Seattle to a board member at the ballet that led to my being interviewed shortly after I landed in Memphis, and it worked out. And I think part of why I've switched, not necessarily cities, but fields and working for different causes, is that I'm just very curious by nature. I was like, I wonder what that's all about. And so it's like I get engage with the intellectual side, just learning about a new, United Way does so much, across the human services fields. And so it's like I felt every day I was learning something new about how they're helping the community. And with the ballet, being out at the studio there in Cordova, I was learning new terminology and about choreography and about that's such a unique life choice
right.
to become a professional ballet dancer, and it's very difficult. So I gained a deep appreciation for the art form. So now I regularly attend the Pacific Northwest Ballet since I moved back to Seattle, and I've gained an appreciation for that. So I feel that those switching to very, very different organizations has enabled me to enrich my life and learn so much about how to build successful communities and what goes into creating this amazing art. But the common theme is, again, I think it's knowing how to build quality relationships for the organization, and being able to quickly assess what the strengths and weaknesses are for the organization, and how to communicate that effectively to a donor where they feel like that their contributions are going to move this forward, move this mission forward, or really enhance the capabilities of the organization. And so I feel that I could work for any number of organizations. And actually, you bring up Nespresso. That was an experience that came to me again through a connection that I had with their marketing team in New York. And so they launched their first actual physical store in the Seattle region about the same time that I was moving back here. And I was helping them on marketing, community relations, and events. And so I found myself in the position where many of these contacts that I had developed in the nonprofit world were then asking me for auction donations from Nespresso and other types of help, and Nespresso really values community partnerships, and so I was that link, and so I got to be on the other side. I've spent most of my career asking other people for things, or and then I was in a position where I was being asked, and so that actually really is valuable for me in thinking through my development career. As we all face a lot of no's and rejection. I mean, you remember the high points and when I got that gift, but you also you face a lot of this is not the right time, or we get too many requests, and so I now have a greater appreciation for that.
No, that's exciting. And I can imagine you got lots of requests because people are very passionate about Nespresso.
Yes. Yes, they are. It's a fantastic product, and I'm fully addicted. So, and that was one of my strategies to ingratiate myself with my new coworkers, as I brought in an espresso machine to the office.
Very nice. I'm sure they liked that.
Gets a lot of use.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So when you've made these changes between these very different organizations, whether nonprofit to for-profit or just between types of businesses, has the hiring manager sometimes had a hard time understanding how you could move from one to another, or have they been pretty open?
That is an interesting question. I've definitely, in the last 6 months, before I started with the film festival, I had interviews, and sometimes I'd be sitting across from, an HR or hiring manager, and they couldn't make sense of my background, and they wanted to see, you're progressively responsible within this field, and they're like, wow, you were here, you lived here, now what did you do here, what did you do here? And I'm like, well, to me, this all makes sense. It's all really the same thing as building relationships. And I feel like having a diversity of experiences is valuable. And like they were looking for something very different. And so, literally there were a couple interviews where about halfway through, I wasn't getting a good feeling. And I think that they weren't figuring me out. I think they thought I was a little too unstructured. And so I was like, well, maybe we should just end this right now. But no, I would continue through. But it was like, you have that moment where it's like, this is definitely not going to be a good fit. And, I had a completely different experience when I went in to talk with the people at my current employer. They, valued the journey that I've been on through my career. And I felt that I had an opportunity to explain, effectively that there is links. But yeah, and it's important to know what kind of culture and environment you want to be in, and to know yourself as much as possible, and what how you can translate your experience for different employers.
You really have to find the one person that gets it. I mean, from my perspective, in terms of digital marketing, I moved from tourism to home services to financial services, which are each really different. And to me, I was doing the exact same job. I was marketing a product online, period.
Right. Yeah.
But I got a lot of questions about, well, you're working for a nonprofit, we're a for-profit, or you were working for a for-profit, we're a nonprofit, or, what do you know about tourism, or what do you know about financial services? And I was like, listen, I know how to sell your product online.
Right.
I mean, I will sell any product online, it doesn't matter. So, but you have to be able to, first of all, verbalize that yourself. You have to be able to, tell your story and your narrative in a way that will make sense to others. And then you have to realize that not everyone's going to be able to get it. Not everyone can see outside that little box. And you just knock on enough doors and you'll find someone who does get it.
Yeah, yes, that's better said than I would. But I completely agree with you.
So you mentioned that you've moved to a lot of different cities. What cities have you lived in? You've got Memphis and Seattle. What other cities are on your list?
Are we saying a period of at least a year?
I mean, I'm open.
Okay. No, I lived in New Orleans as well, and we didn't get into all of that, but I was a consultant and worked in different fields down there as well, and then in Philadelphia, I was there immediately before I moved to Seattle. I was in Philadelphia, and I was doing projects there and in New York, which is, of course, as we know, very convenient there. I've also been in Montreal. I've been in Minneapolis, and I went to college in a small town in New Hampshire. So I think that covers the main one.
Most of it, okay. So I work with a lot of clients who really want to move, but they're afraid. They have a lot of fear around it. They have a lot of reasons why it won't work. what advice would you give to someone about moving and also getting connected in a new city? I mean, what's made you be able to do this?
Yeah, I think I touched on a little bit before, is that when I moved to Memphis, I really had no knowledge of what the community was about, and had never visited there, and just literally, I was using tools like LinkedIn to find out like who I'm connected to there, and and then luckily I happened to meet a couple people who had moved from Memphis to Seattle. I was able to talk with them, right before I left. But then moving there, I guess you got to be very humble and open-minded when you're entering a new community where the culture and the history may be very different, and the other structures it might be different, and even like coming back to Seattle now. I'd been away for 7 years. I'd mainly been living in the South and then a little bit on the East Coast, and there were a lot of things that I forgot about Seattle from the first 8 years that I lived here. And I was at this event last night for my organization, and commenting with many people that nobody in Seattle dresses up for anything. People are so casual here, and that kind of seeps into other parts of the work life and the culture and things like that. And it's very different from. I was able to do some fundraising projects in Manhattan in the last year. It's like that's a completely different ball game from Seattle. So I kind of had to re-enter the culture here, and of course, what helped me is I have so many connections here, friends and professional relationships that being back a year, I haven't even gone through them all. But yeah, I think it can be daunting. In the last 3 years, I've done projects in New Orleans and Philadelphia and New York, and each of those places is extremely distinct. And just being able to find a few key relationships that you can build on, and go forth, and then being very sensitive and step back and understand that it is a different culture and you have to operate a little bit differently and be very adaptable. But yeah, there are I've had moments in all of these situations where I'm like, wow, what am I doing here? This is not this is not where I feel comfortable. So yeah, there it's I guess you do have to have a little bit of that spirit of adventure to do that. But I think it can be done if you really want to. And I think that's valuable to have experience in different cultures. And then the other piece of that is how interconnected everything is. I'll tell a quick story. One of my best friends from Memphis, who now lives in the Bay Area. I think you know who I'm talking about. She ran a digital marketing firm.
Yes, I do know who you're talking about.
And so she was doing. She got. And I mentioned all these cities that I've been in recently. I love this story because I met her in Memphis. We became good friends. She was involved with the ballet. She moved to San Francisco. I was in New Orleans and Philly, and then I was in Seattle. So she picked up a client through a Philadelphia foundation that I was aware of from my time in Philly to do this project for this client who was in Seattle while she was living in San Francisco. And so she came up last August, and she was on this contract from this foundation. And then she introduced me to this guy who had started this organization, and just like everything came together at once, like literally it touched on every city that I've lived in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, just the fact that, she introduced me to someone like that I immediately connected back to, what I had been doing in Philadelphia and New Orleans and Memphis was quite stunning. So, yeah, you never know how these things are going to happen.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
The world is very small.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Well, this has been great. We've covered so many different topics. Is there any other advice that we've missed or anything else you'd like to mention?
No, I think, I feel really good about, what we covered. Relationships are key in so many levels when we're talking about just what general career advice, and very, very specifically in development is, I think, is the most important thing. And having a little spirit of adventure, and and just trying new things. I think has been something that's been key to what's kept me on my toes and engaged in my field. I feel like every day is something new and interesting and exciting, and I have to rein myself in sometimes and focus on what steps I'm taking now to get to a larger goal. But yeah, I think imagination and creativity are also very, very important for this field and many others. And
that's fantastic.
That's the end of my advice.
Very good. Well, this has been fantastic. So if someone was interested to learn more about the Seattle International Film Festival, where should they go?
Oh, well, this is really exciting because literally today we refreshed our website and it's better than ever.
Great.
And we also loaded in all the information for the festival that starts on May 14th. So we have over 400 films from over 90 countries coming to Seattle, and you can view trailers and information about all of them at SIFF.net, SIFF.net.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yes. So and I encourage, it's the best time to visit Seattle. It's become just an amazing gem. We also do year-round programming, and it's thrilling to be part of this great organization and try to help it grow and grow and grow.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I hope everyone will check out the website. And Roger, thank you for joining me today. This has been incredibly helpful.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad to be talking with you again, and I'll try to make sure that it's less time between the next time we talk to each other.
I know. That would be great. That would be great.
And come out and visit sometime.
I definitely will. I would love that. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. Please tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher to ensure you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.